Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for July 2022. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs. By sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/roguewatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we are glad to have you. This month's topic, as determined by the Patreon poll, is 5th edition, specifically how 5e differs from older editions of D&D. There's no denying that D&D is more popular than ever, so how has 5e contributed to that success? What can we learn or yearn for from previous editions? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Stan.
Greetings.
Pegleg Smitty.
Oh.
Christopher.
Hello.
Dory.
Hello.
AKA Role Player Role. And The Fireworks Factory.
Hello.
So I am one of the many folks who had very little experience with tabletop D&D until 5th edition. And I remember, in fact, when we were starting to get together as friends to play online via Roll20, we started with Pathfinder. It was another friend who was a DM. And then after that, I expressed interest in running Shadowrun. For those of you that have been watching the channel for a long time or dug deep into some old videos, we initially ran Shadowrun Adventures, which I really liked that setting, but the rules never quite jived with me and never quite enjoyed them fully. And around that time, 5th edition, I think, was brand new. This would have been, either 2014 or 2015. And I don't know what initially got me into 5th edition, but I think I read through the starter rules, and the one thing that really hung on for me was the advantage and disadvantage system, because something that drove me absolutely crazy for something like Shadowrun and Pathfinder and other games was all these juggling modifiers you had to keep track of, depending on what skills the players had and what circumstances they were doing something in. It's -2 this, +1 that. Shadowrun was horrible for this, because it's raining outside, but I've got a grip on my gun, and just everything contributed all these crazy modifiers, and it was just doing this horrible math problem at the end. And then 5e, it was just like a ray of light from the sky that was like, hey, if you think they're doing something that's going to help them, they have advantage on the roll. And if it's the opposite, they have disadvantage. And I thought that was so elegant and so perfect that one system pretty much made me fall in love with 5e right from the start, and then everything else just felt great from there. Stan, I know you've got some experience with older
I've been waiting
editions.
for this.
So why don't you kick us off with telling me about your initial feelings of 5e versus the older editions.
5e is what got me back DMing again. Started watching when it was still prototyped. Some of the old Ack Inc. was still doing 4th edition, and it was like, man, it's D&D. It's fun to listen to.
I listened to those too. Yeah, that actually got me into D&D in a lot of ways too.
The old podcast stuff, and it's like, this is confusing as heck, but it's fun story. So I'll listen to it. And then when they came out with D&D Next, and like you were saying, advantage, disadvantage, no math, storytelling, I like this. This is really fun. There are a few things that I miss, from some of the older editions. A few things that don't quite exactly, as we've discussed before, I like to do my stuff a little bit more realistic. Some things just don't fit that for me. But overall, I really like 5th edition. If nothing else, it's great to bring new players into the hobby.
Yeah, for sure. Pegleg, give me your opening thoughts on 5th edition, please.
I love 5th edition, but I also only have... We did maybe 10 sessions for a 4th edition campaign. And there are some things that I like. There's some things that I've brought over.
Oh, hang on one second. Lucas, I think that's you in
I can
there.
chat a bit, actually. Yes?
Hey, I need to maybe mute you when you're not talking, because I'm getting a lot of feedback from your...
My bad. I'll mute myself.
Problem. Thank you. All right, Pegleg, please continue.
Yeah, I have a limited experience with
limited edition
editions
D&D.
other
Holy
than-
shit!
Yeah. Limited experience with 4th edition. We did maybe 10 sessions, and there are definitely a few things that I like. For example, the bloodied condition, where it's just you're at half HP. It's nice to give your players a little bit of information and skill challenges. But I definitely feel like 5th edition was a step in the right direction, and I probably wouldn't have stuck with the D&D in general if it were still in the 4th edition mindset.
I think weren't there specific like abilities or modes that triggered whenever somebody got the bloodied condition too? Or was it just a flavor?
Some monsters did like they do extra damage or they get an extra attack when they were reduced to half HP.
I kind of like that system. I don't know why they discontinued that, but just kind of going to a rage mode. It's very video gamey to me. Like, you know, the bosses are doing their things more or faster, or they unleash, or they even unlock a new attack or something.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of do that with the mythic stuff, I guess, with the bosses in 5th edition a little bit.
Yeah. So not a lot of experience. I really like 5th edition. Like you said, the advantage system it's just so easy. It's great.
Yeah. Christopher, opening thoughts on using 5e versus older editions. Do you have experience with older editions?
Yeah, so I've experienced trying. My first experience into D&D was with a group of friends. They were much younger than I were because I didn't really get into it until after. Well, I've already had kids by the time I started to get into D&D. And so when we got started working at a university and younger kids and groups came around, because when I was in high school, we were just outdoors on our bikes, and I never found a group of kids that in my neighborhood that played D&D. It was never a thing. But started working at the university, we ran into these kids that introduced us to the game. We started with 4E, and it felt really felt it was hard to come in. I needed to know when you talked about all these different modifiers. I had to figure out it was really complex when we were trying to sit down and figure out what was going on. At the same time, we had the first person running it. The campaign was super expressive, a lot of role play, a lot of things like that. But but then that group kind of fell apart, and some of the group spun over, and another DM came in, and the second DM had a dice tower and these game science dice that seemed to roll nothing but really high numbers. So we were all super suspicious. But we were all level 1 characters. I put like a week into my fighter, and he ran it against as if we were a level 2 or level 3 party. And we just got TPK'd in a session and a half. And then everybody was sour because he just smashed through the party, and we had put all this time into the characters, so everybody was super bitter. We spent more time building the characters than playing them.
Oh no.
And then we all got busy with work, and it was just hard to get back in. And then I started watching, and then my kids got older, and 5e came along, and I was watching YouTube videos, because also this was 2011. YouTube videos were around, but not enough content for me to stumble upon, for stuff now. But for 5e, there was I found the Roll20 channel, going through the whole thing, and was watching all these games, and I was like, wow, I can do this. And like you said, with the advantage, disadvantage, all the hard stuff that I remember about 4E just wasn't here. And then so we started bringing the kids in. We ran Lost Minds and Found Delver, which was truly a great intro.
Yeah.
Everybody got into it. It was kind of railroady, but as I was DMing that for kids that were 9 through 15, so it was good for me as a new DM to be like, this does this in this scenario, this does this, and kind of help me, with the monsters. By the end,
you
I was
want that
able
in a
to.
starter scenario, I think, is a little bit
Oh,
more guidance.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then as I was midstream in 5e, somebody says, "Hey, do you want to come play Pathfinder with us?" And I was like, "Sure." And then it was like, "Oh wow!" But now I understood it a little bit more. So trying to find, realizing the leveling up and all the feat dependencies. I was a ranger, and we had so many feat dependencies, and so many new rules applied. I was okay with it. I think if I would have done Pathfinder first, I would have probably been like, oh, maybe that's too much for me. But with 5e, and then I could, turn on and kind of do Pathfinder when I wanted to. But 5e has been so easy. The kids grasp it so easy. And then we tried the Star Wars RPG, and I've play tested the new Marvel RPG, which comes back to sort of complicated rules. Definitely with the Star Wars one, but there's a balance there.
I
But
think
I
you
think
touched
5e
on
just stomps them all.
Yeah, I think you touched on
Yeah.
two important factors, which is Lost Mine of Fendover is a really good fucking starter scenario, and that has helped sell 5e very, very well. And B, the rise of streaming, it pretty much coincides with 5th edition in terms of people. I mean, it's really helped to normalize and popularize D&D as well, and helped it kind of take it out of the proverbial basement setting and allow just the world at large to be able to see people sit at a table and just play this game and engage in this imaginative role-playing space together, as well as just have it be entertaining. A lot of us play games at the table with our friends, maybe not even D&D, but just like board games or something, and that would probably be entertaining for a lot of people to watch, is just, the camaraderie of friends and the natural ebb and flow of a game. And obviously D&D works very, very well for that. Dory, give me your thoughts on 5th edition versus older editions. Do you have any experience playing older editions?
I actually don't have experience myself playing any of the older editions. But I've obviously watched and listened to a lot of podcasts and videos discussing the differences. I definitely think running a campaign for my high schoolers using 5e has been a really great experience. They have picked up a lot of the game mechanics, and I think a lot of the rules and things have become more user-friendly and more, I would say, common sense intuitive almost with 5e based on what I've seen and heard about older editions. So I'm really thankful for that because the kids have picked it up.
Have you had any challenges with teaching the game, or has it always been pretty accessible and intuitive for teenagers to pick it up?
I think I want to say a little bit of both. You just have the type of kids that lean into just becoming their D&D character, which makes it easier for them to almost accept adjudication at the table and understand the things that you're explaining. And then you have the type of teenager who wants to really overanalyze and overthink. And well, I guess we have adults like that too, that are sitting with their rule books next to them and just very like letter of the law. And I'm more, rules as interpreted more than rules as written. I tend to lean more interpretation. And so I would say out of the table of 10 that I run.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know. I know. I would say 6 of them have really picked up on the whole idea behind 5e, which is a great, I would say, combination of the role play and the mechanics aspect of it.
I do remember. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I also have seen our own share of issues just because of the openness of 5e in terms of crafting characters. It's my understanding that a lot of the older editions, you had less character choices, which made things a little bit more cut and dry when building.
I know. So my own experience is very limited. I played just a smattering of second edition in high school, and then most of my experience honestly comes from video games. I played a lot of D&D video games, and I do know that I feel like 5th edition is a lot more accessible. I think 5th edition actually bakes a lot of the power directly into the characters and especially to the subclasses, whereas before, and Christopher was talking about this too with the feats, so they had just, it was feat crazy, and it almost felt like there's video games that it's like, oh, you have to make your build like this or you'll screw up your character from the beginning, and they just feel very hardcore, I guess is the word, like a gamer's game, where it's people that really like the minutia of building and maximizing that character potential. And I feel like that was how a lot of the, and somebody who has more experience with older editions, please feel free to jump in, but I feel like that was kind of the experience of a lot of the older editions of D&D versus 5e, which kind of rebalanced things to just say, well, feats are actually optional in 5e, which we had a whole DM roundtable about this a long time ago, where we talked about it, and I asked around if anybody didn't use feats. Everybody was like, wait, what? Feats are optional? Like, yeah, that's technically, it's a variant rule in 5e, so they swung the pendulum so hard. Whereas if you go back to third edition is the one I'm probably most familiar with because I've never run a Knights. It was feat crazy. Like, you had to take so many feats, and you had to plan, okay, I'm going to take this feat at this level, this feat at this. Like, you had to plan your whole character build. Whereas in 5e, I think the biggest choice you make as a character, obviously spells are still a pretty big deal, and just about anybody can cast spells these days, but is if you just want a multi-class. And a lot of the subclasses and the optional feats, and especially the ones they released later, even say, hey, instead of, it's like somebody like resting their hand on your shoulder, it's like, oh, you don't have to multi-class, you can just take this feat. You don't have to multi-class into a wizard, you can just take the magic initiate feat, and then you can cast your one spell for your flavor. And I thought that's also a pretty brilliant system, because before I had these multi-class disaster characters that were like 4 different classes, because I wanted my rogue to have all the dual wielding stuff, so I had to take a couple levels of ranger, and then they became some kind of whatever the shadow thief thing is, because that had some cool, and you just had to, it was crazy that you had to have all these builds and stuff. And on the one hand, it's kind of fun, because again, if you're into that build system of being able to maximize this certain character archetype, then that certainly has some appeal. But I think 5e helps fix a lot of the intimidating qualities that can certainly bring, and helps unlock D&D for way more people. And I think and Dory, I think you would be able to comment on this, the fact that it's a lot easier to teach than maybe a lot of other game systems because of that.
For sure. Definitely. I remember when I first was introduced to D&D back when I was in high school, I had a few friends that played, but I was interested. It was kind of like a, silent lurker, but I was kind of overwhelmed. I remember back then going, some of the stuff I don't understand. And it was a worry for me starting this group. These kids had been asking me for 2 years to do this, and I finally said, okay, we're gonna do this. And but yeah, it's like I said, it's intuitive. If something makes sense in real life that it should be happening, and it happens at the table, even though you have wizards and magic and goblins and all this crazy stuff going on, the kids are going, that makes sense. That would happen. And they roll with it. So yeah, I would say it's definitely easier to teach mechanically, for sure.
Fireworks Factory You have experience with older editions, or what is your
I do have experience with some of the older editions. That's where I actually started, was playing, I think it was the 2nd edition. So whatever the blue or red box sets were. I'm pretty sure that's considered 2nd edition. I played that.
It's actually the basic version. It was
okay.
Basic, Advanced, Companion, and the Master set. Then the Immortals later. So that was the basic basic D&D that went along with 2nd edition Advanced D&D.
Yeah. Thinking about it now, it is the basic, the expert, and I can't remember what the teal was. Companion, I believe you said.
Yep. Companion.
But I played a fair amount of that back in grade school, and then after getting into high school and college, that my tabletop role-playing game experience sort of faded out. But then I heard about 5th edition D&D and started reading into it, and I was like, holy cow. The difference is like driving a Ford Model T versus a flying DeLorean. So it's everything to everyone's point, to those who had mentioned this already, is that everything feels much more streamlined and easier to pick up and just run with it, whether it's learning the rules or creating characters or running the pre-written adventures. And so after reading the player's handbook and some of the monster manual and Lost Mine of Phandelver, I felt much more encouraged to start running games. And so, yeah, in my opinion, so far, 5th edition is the best edition.
I expect that would be shared by most, if not everyone, in this system here. If not for just the fact that it's been so popular that it's brought almost a renaissance to D&D. 40 some years later, which is absolutely incredible. Lucas, all right, go ahead, Stan.
No, I was just going to go back to what you were saying about the differences from the early edition. You were talking about feats and some of that stuff.
Yeah.
That it's basically, from what I've seen from playing 1st, 2nd, 3.5, and now 5th, it's been a pendulum. You started off with race was your class. You were an elf, you were a dwarf, you were a halfling. And that's what your class was. You didn't do anything else besides that. Humans had a little bit of option. You could be a fighter, cleric, or a wizard, or a rogue. But if you weren't a human, your race was your class. To 3.5, 3 and 3.5.
Which is just straight racist. Like, all dwarves were just the dwarf race class.
Right, and all elves were a gish. They were fighter magic users. That's just their culture. That's what you are.
Yep.
3.5, everybody, you can't do anything without feats. If you don't say feats, you're hamstrung. You're just not a capable character. To now, we're on the opposite of 1st edition, where race is irrelevant and there's a cornucopia of choices. Like Dory was saying, there's so many races and all of these other things that it's overwhelming when you're rolling up a character.
Mm-hmm.
That's why in my world I strip it down. I'm a little bit more than PHB only. And it's like Tasha's has got some neat stuff for added feats, but I don't use most of it.
Well, and it's interesting you make that point, because that's happened years into 5e's life cycle now. And and a lot of people are arguing and wondering, like, are we already in 5.5? Because Tasha's especially was probably the biggest one that really unlocked the concept of races and just said, to where they were like, look, just fucking put your points where you want, be whatever race you want. That's what people want. And it turns out that's freeing in a lot of ways, because when it first started, we were a little hamstrung. I remember when I was looking at character designs, I'm like, oh, I want to play, my hair metal rockstar bard, but the half orc gets, the penalty to charisma, so that would be a terrible choice, and versus in the, with Tasha's, now I can play like whatever race I want to be a hair metal, and my wife can play her halfling barbarian and not feel, severely underpowered, because people like to play a gimmick character is probably not the right term, but unique situations, I guess, with race class archetyped concepts. But very few people want to very purposely mechanically hamstring their character. Even if they don't know much about the advanced mechanics of D&D, you still know, well, if I want to attack, I need a decent either strength or dex roll to be able to do my thing. And it sucks if you're rolling, with bad modifiers. So I really appreciate that they unlocked that stuff, but it's interesting that 5e didn't start off like that. So maybe it's been kind of incremental baby steps in the last couple of years too, which I almost feels like 5.5 to me, that especially with Tasha's. Lucas, you said you're available to voice chat. Would you like to give me?
Yes, I am hoping. I'm hoping there's no bad feedback nonsense anymore.
Okay. I think you're sounding okay. Give me your opening thoughts on 5e versus older editions.
Well, I started playing 3.5 in high school with a group of friends. I was introduced to it. Later on, through the years, we shifted to 4th edition. Then we kind of split up, and I found 5th edition way later with a new group of friends, and it's never gone back, really. I think, well, to a certain extent, when I was that young, I was really fumbling through 3.5 and 4th edition. I wasn't playing optimally, I assure you. But now, even in retrospect, having looked at the systems, I think the story is king. Story is the absolute. Story is why the Renaissance of D&D is happening. Because instead of you have to play these specific characters, it's about your story, your OC, your world and narrative, and that's what has the draw. It doesn't have a draw because it's the best war game with strategy and stuff. It has, so you'd like to have competent mechanics and fights and stuff, but it's about telling your stories, and that can't be replicated through a video game, even the most immersive character creation thing,
I did hear that was a chief complaint. I never played 4th edition, but I've heard, and some of you that played it can chime in, but that it was more of a tactics game. They kind of leaned hard into maybe trying to sell minis and really going.
I'm not sure if this is official, but it certainly seems that way. They were trying to compete with WoW. So they said, okay, let's make it like an MMO. And they explicitly said the fighter's a tank, or whatever you call it. There's a tank, there's a healer, support, there's a DPS, and that's a competent system. Obviously, it's the golden triangle for MMOs and a lot of RPGs, but it doesn't give you, it takes away so much freedom. In 5th edition, what I love about 5th edition is that, there's no, you're not screwed if you have a bad composition. Yeah, a party of 3 barbarians is probably not going to be as balanced and capable as, a cleric and a fighter and a rogue, but, I mean, it's feasible. Especially with this flexibility of the subclasses, you're not just I remember when I was first playing, I mean, we were in high school, I didn't know what I was doing, they probably didn't know what they were doing, but one of my friends said, no, you should be a cleric, we need a cleric, But and I don't want the races and the classes to be utterly cosmetic, but to a certain extent, that's the fun. People want to be a tiefling because they can have horns and be a weird skin color and look cool.
Yeah.
They don't want to be pigeonholed into no, you got to be a warlock, What if they want to be a fighter or whatever,
Yeah, that's the part that I like.
So in short, I think I'm not just saying this because of recency bias, although it's probably a factor, but I think 5e has its flaws. Every system has its flaws, but it's the best marriage of 4e's systems and 3.5's flexibility and options.
What was so failing about 4e's storytelling?
It was basically a video game on paper. If I want to play a video game, I'll play a video game.
I mean, sorry, I agree with that because essentially it's if you're gonna be a bard, you're a support. That's it. It's basically just an extension of caveman D&D, where it's if you're gonna be a dwarf, you're a tank.
Yeah, it felt weird. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say a lot of the agency was taken away. Right, you only had certain options. If you're you talk about stories being railroaded, with 4E, I felt that way with my character. Like my character can come in, he can only do one thing. His mechanics are, set in stone, in a certain way. I didn't feel the freedom with my character that I do in 5e.
What do we think about 5e's subclass system? And I know previous editions of D&D had, is it prestige classes? Was it like, they were like classes you had to unlock for various prerequisites, which was another thing you had to build and prepare for while leveling. It's like, oh, I want to be able to be a blackguard or an arcane archer or something, which means I need to take these feats and make sure I've got this much base attack bonus and I've got this many arcane spells. Like, it really got into the weeds of all this. And then 5e is like, hey, fighter, when you're level 3, you can be 6 different not at launch, but you can be 3 different things, and then every couple years you can be some more things officially. How has that improved or changed for anybody just using subclass? Because I feel like the subclass thing is also a big part of 5e.
Do you mind if I go, or should
go
I?
Go ahead. Yep.
What I really love subclasses, and I vastly prefer them to prestige classes, because subclasses aren't optional. Whereas prestige classes are like, you could just be 1 to 20 as a ranger, or you could take a detour midway through your rangering and be an arcane archer. And they just seem superfluous, and they were very specific, like, oh, dwarven defender, you better be a dwarf. And essentially what I love about the prestige classes is that you're never just a generic wizard, you're never a generic barbarian, you're always a type, a sort of special kind,
I do like video games where, and I think Fire Emblem does this, where you start off as kind of a generic class, maybe like an like you're a fighter or a spellcaster, and then as you progress, you can then specialize. Because I'm always stressed out. I'm just going to use video games again. When I have to make a game-defining choice at the very beginning of the game, they're like, "Hey, which of these 10 classes do you want to play in our game?" And I'm like, "I don't know, man. I haven't played your game. I don't know what I'm going to enjoy doing or what I'm going to do," which means I'm probably going to have to go back and, replay this introductory level a couple times. Obviously based on my experience playing a lot of other games, I can pretty much nail down generally what I want to do. But I like games, and I think 5e does that pretty well, where you can start off as, you still have, I guess, a dozen choices now, but then it allows you to specialize a little bit further and say, okay, well, I want to be more supportive version of my class, or I want to, or not even mechanically, you can say, well, I want to be a more Fey-themed version of my class, or I want to be a more demonic-themed version of my class. You could really go with the role-playing aspect and then marry the mechanics to whatever narrative choice you've made.
That's also the nice thing about 5th edition, is that, there's Tasha's, there's Xanathar's, there's the Player's Handbook, but that's it. Compared to 3rd edition or 4th edition, there are like dozens of classes and prestige classes or exalted whatevers. Here, they're just like, they're making a smart choice to not oversaturate the waters, not have like a splat book come out every other year with a dozen more classes and subclasses and subclasses and classes. And then, because really,
that's a good point.
I kind of don't agree with it's not a binary thing, but to a large extent, it's like, do you really need to, does this really warrant a class, or is it just a type of play style, or is it just a mod or something like that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I review a lot of products, and whenever I review I treat a class a lot different than a subclass, because a subclass to me, I'm pretty much always welcoming for. I'm like, hey, this is great. This is something that it's a niche that's been filled yet. But if someone approaches to me with with an entire class built up, then I judge pretty harshly, because I'm like, all right, I almost feel like, why couldn't this be an email? Like, why couldn't this be a subclass of somebody else? Just because the system is so elegant, and it's so much easier to start you off as one of those existing classes, because you already have a good enough of choices. You touch on something that's a great thing that I haven't even brought up in this entire DM Roundtable, which is they have kept the content regular but pretty scarce, which is shocking given how popular 5th edition is. And it's almost like a purposeful scarcity of the product, But it's a great thing because, and you know, those of you that have played through previous editions, Stan, maybe you can weigh in on just how many books people had to buy previously. You know, maybe just books on entire, specific bestiaries, or you know, just here's a bunch of new classes or a bunch of new feats or something, and they've compiled all that stuff into just those few books. So Xanathar's is obviously a big one for players, and then Tasha's, and now they've even tried to condense it even further with Multiverse of Monsters. I keep wanting to say Multiverse of Madness. And that even combines like previous books, so they're just giving us kind of updated versions. I've been very impressed, especially given how popular 5e is, that they haven't been just rolling out stuff constantly. Especially given, you know, for those of you that check the UA, the Unearthed Arcana, which is their kind of their test server where they roll out. Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff in there, and I'm impressed by how much stuff doesn't actually ever make it into a book, and instead it really feels like they're trying to test the stuff to make it work both narratively and mechanically before putting it in a published book. And instead, a lot of their time and energy is put into these huge campaign adventures, which I think is what a lot of people really want from Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah, you didn't have a lot of the books in first and second edition. You started to get with AD&D second edition. You started getting more books where, you know, Deity and Demigods and some of those things started coming out besides just the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and DMG. And now you started getting massive content with third and fourth edition. You know, they were printing books every month. What I do miss is the amount of published adventures, where we're getting once a year, maybe twice on a, you know, if you count some of Mercer stuff that's actually official WotC content.
Yeah,
you might get 2 a year.
I think we probably average about 2.
You get a major, you know, Storm Kings, you know, Princes, Tomb, something like that's going to come out, and it's like, hey, great, that's a game year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years worth of content. Where in second, you know, AD&D, there were 75 or more adventures, and so you had, imagine the DM's Guild was actually official content.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, it's the way the license works. It kind of becomes official content. They own your ass when you publish something on the DM's Guild. Make no bones about it.
But it's not edited, and it doesn't have the official tie-ins to, you know, everything's being run out of Faerun or the old Karamikos things, or when Dragonlance came out, you had an entire department of D&D TSR back then that was just doing adventures for the Dragonlance world, the world of Krynn. So are we playing Oriental adventures? You had your Asian content. You had Dragonlance. You had stuff that was in Forgotten Realms, because that's when that came out.
Were these adventures as large and as comprehensive as like a Curse of Strahd or a Tomb of Annihilation, or were they smaller?
They were like one of the ones I ported one over from second edition to fifth edition for my girls' game, where they ran through it. Probably took them, and we played for say 4 or 5 hours a session. It probably took them 4 or 5 sessions to go through that module. So it's not, you know,
maybe like Phandelver length, you think?
Yeah, Phandelver would be a good way of looking at it. Yeah,
I wish they would release more that were that length, frankly.
That's one of the big things I miss. Yeah. There's a couple of mechanics that I miss, that bringing up this topic makes me, I'm about ready to start another campaign, and that may get brought in. I'm not sure. I have another DM at the table, so I might get shot. But that's something I'm thinking is bringing up some of the, you made me think, Eric, bringing some of my old stuff back.
That's what we do. You know what I really, and I don't want to derail this too much into talking about Pathfinder, but I really like Paizo's adventure release schedule, where they release the adventure paths, which are I don't even know how to describe the length of an adventure path, but it feels like it would take you a couple sessions to get through, and then, or maybe longer, and then it would be 5 or 6 of those would then make up the campaign, and a lot of them, you know, they keep you going pretty brisk, and it would literally cover you from 1 to 20, which that can be a whole other DM roundtable, but 5th edition, for all of its advantages, seems to completely fail when it comes to offering high-level content. And Dory, I think you were just mentioning how you were starting to fixing to start a high-level campaign, and there's like which just drove me crazy that all of these 5th edition adventures, they just stop like right when your character starts becoming a certified badass at like level 11 or 12. Like every single one of them does that, except for maybe I think Out of the Abyss goes to like 15. And I really would love if Wizards could A, either give us some high level content, or B, maybe you don't have to release these giant campaign books every 6 months, but give us, you know, like a Fandelver sized adventure path, and that can be like part 1, and then release another one a month later, part 2. Probably got a pretty aggressive schedule. I don't know how they use a combination, like different writers basically work on different parts, and then it equals the entire campaign. But I've looked at a number of these, and they all seem pretty impressive and cool and interesting.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that what Tyranny of Dragons did? I mean, they released the first part, Horde of the Dragon Queen, and the second part when you went to 20 and fought Tiamat at the end. No?
It doesn't go up.
Do not
high.
Go to 20. No, they do. No. They cheat, Lucas. They cheat on
How do you fight Tiamat?
Well, because they do this. This is another. Now you're gonna make me go on a rant. I'm gonna go on a fucking rant.
Oh,
see, they
Boy,
do.
Here we go.
They keep fucking doing this at the end. Like you fight fucking a Serac at the end of Tomb of Annihilation. My ass. You fight a Serac. Like you're level 11 because you're imbued with trickster gods, and then at the end of Storm King's Thunder, you're fighting like an ancient blue dragon. No, you're fucking not. You're imbued with the strength of frost giants. You got frost giant allies. Like it's a total cop out because they want you to have that epic late game experience, but they don't have the content to get you there. So instead, they cheat, and you all drink magic hero potions, and you buff up, and then go and defeat some big bad named creature like a Tiamat or a I forget what the Out of the Abyss one. I think at least in Out of the Abyss, you're like doing other things that's like stopping, it's Orcus or Demogorgon or somebody. But
Tiamat was CR 30, and she's horrible stat block. It's horribly strong, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it's a straight fight.
It's not Tiamat.
It's not Tiamat. Yeah.
It's so what the spoilers, guys.
Actually,
spoilers.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to step away because I'm in the middle of playing Rise of Tiamat. So,
well, we don't have to get into it. We don't have to get in. We don't have to get into it. But the point is,
you can weaken it. It's not the full stat block.
Yeah, the point is,
say that
you don't. They cheat basically. Like there is no good high level content. But they want you to have that late, cool end game, epic creature experience, and yet they don't get there, and that drives me crazy. A Serac in Tomb, I guess spoilers obviously for Tomb, but he's on the fucking cover of the book, has nothing to do with that adventure. I mean, I guess he technically brought the big nasty thing over there, but you don't have to use him. It's dumb. It's dumb. It drives me crazy.
So at that level, what kind of combat do you envision working? That's not 6 hours of a single combat.
I mean,
I didn't say it wouldn't be 6 hours.
But I'm just saying, but it's like that. So the problem is at that scale, you have a party of 5, everybody, you get, everyone who becomes badass. But then how do you keep the combat interesting? Other than having them just fight more of those monsters, or an insane amount of stats. Like how does that combat stay interesting?
I know Mythic Odyssey of Theros, I believe, added mythic actions to big bad creatures, which was really cool. Essentially, it was the video game bullshit thing where you take down the boss's life bar, and you're like, oh man, that was kind of tough, but I expected it to be harder. And then all of a sudden it starts laughing maniacally and gets up, and the health bar recharges, and he becomes Super Saiyan, like second phase 2 battle. That's what these mythic actions do. It says, hey, when their hit points go down, they automatically gain their hit points again, and then they unlock these new, essentially they're like double legendary actions that you can do, I believe, mythic actions, and then they have like a new trait they can do. That at least was, to answer your question, for boss fights, gave new meaning to the fight. And I liked the fact that narratively it seemed really cool, right? Because you think you defeat the big bad, and then it enters its super, be like if you're fighting a dragon, all of a sudden its just skin melts off, and now you're fighting a Draco Lich, and it's got all these other abilities and things. Like, it just felt like a really cool, epic moment. If you're asking about balance, man, I don't fucking know. Like, D&D is not balanced for the high level at all. Good luck to all DMs out there. You pretty much have to play by the, it has as many hit points as I want this game to last, because I don't know how else you can do it.
I think part of the answer to make good high-level combat, not even just balanced, but at least good, which is don't use the Tarask, or don't use Tarask things. Because Tarasks, on paper, they have all the big stats, but they're easy to choose. Even if they weren't easy to choose. Say the Tarask could fly and it had a ranged attack. It's boring. It's just a big beat stick. You want, at high-level play, all the players have these nasty, evil tricks, like your wizard and their horrible thingies.
Yeah, you put people in like a force cage and they can't get out. And it just fucks them up.
Like all these, mental prison. You could screw over a lot of. I mean, the answer is, the reason they probably haven't done it yet is because it's very tricky for them to figure out.
But that,
you roll up PCs and you put the actual characters.
Level 18 PC, so which honestly, is a flaw in the game design then that Wizards needs to admit and say, like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have the game go to 20 then if we can't come up with content that goes up that
honestly, high. I know they're listening to us and my advice, of course, but they need to just release a guide or a supplement or a series of adventures that start from 10 to 20 or 15 to 20, and with a big preface or first 2 chapters on advice and suggestions, how to roll characters, just roll characters that start at 15 or 10, and how to give and general advice for shenanigans and stuff, because it's a missed opportunity. Because there's a lot of. I mean, they're just choosing the easy way out. They're choosing to avoid the problem instead of solving it and reaping the rewards.
But to bring it back to the older editions,
I was going to say, we're dealing a little bit, although I think this is important to talk about a flaw specifically in 5th edition, but go ahead, Steve.
there is some things that 5e does that are flashbacks of some of the old editions that do balance the field. Exhaustion. It doesn't matter if you're 20th level or 1st level. 6 levels, you're done. So going back to 1st and 2nd edition, there's some monsters that I really miss that I don't care if you're a 20th level or not. You get hit with a rot grub, you're going to have a bad time. And this is a little worm that's 2 inches long and it will kill you. There's little things like that. There are traps, poisons. I remember a module that shall go nameless. They had insta-kill traps, and you were fighting nothing but kobolds.
So
this module, you were like level 20 characters, and these kobolds were gonna mess you up.
Rot grub traps everywhere.
No, they had some magic and a few other things, but you walking in, it's like, you think you're King Kong. They're kobolds. Who cares? And all of a sudden, the first character goes down, and you go, what? This just got real.
I feel like an evolution of a 5th edition also is that the game, people are more attached to their characters.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I
don't
know why that changed. Necessarily, it just, like, to use a video game term, it feels like older editions were more like a roguelike dungeon crawl, where it's like, I don't fucking care, just roll. Maybe it's because it was a more mechanic system game, and you're like, I'm just playing this character, this build, and I'm gonna see how far they get.
You hit 0 points, you're dead. There wasn't a Spare the Dying. There wasn't.
That's true too. There wasn't a
save.
Death saves, right? Was death saves? Is death saves new in 5th edition?
I believe so.
I know that in 3.5 you can go to -10. And every round you lose like 1 hit point below 0.
One thing I did So one thing I did like about 4th edition that carried on to 5th edition was the 4th edition in the base player's handbook. You had tieflings and dragonborn. Because I remember when I was young and I was in the bookstore or whatever, looking at the player's handbook for 3rd edition, you saw, oh, look at all the races you could play: human, skinny human, buff human, short human, and it's like, I get it.
Pointy-eared human, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, but part of the fun is like, you know, everyone sees, you see so much fan art of their tiefling characters or their dragonborn characters because they're cool.
Yeah,
they look fun. You're not just a human; you're a human in real life. You know?
No, I 100%. I'm with you on that. Man, you give me different. Like, I will play whatever the lizard people are in the Elder Scrolls. I want to play the most exotic, the insect. If there's an insect race in your game, I'm playing the fucking insect dude, like, or the Minotaur or something. Like, give me something that's super different and exotic. I will absolutely play that because that for the exact same reason that bores me to tears. So I'm just gonna play somebody that's slightly human, even though they have technically very different cultural backgrounds and belief systems and all that. But like the actual look and exoticism of the character, if I have wings, fuck yeah, give me the one with wings.
I'll toss one more out for you, Eric, of something I missed from 1st and 2nd edition.
Yeah.
Weapon specialization. So right now, if you're a fighter, Alakazam, you know all of the martial weapons, all the simple weapons. You know everything that's ever been a weapon. Older editions, what are you proficient in? You can only get so many slots, and then you can burn slots to get what's called specialization or double specialization. And at first level, if you burn all your slots into one weapon, you get 3 attacks per 2 rounds. So every other round, you get 2 attacks, and you feel like King Kong. You can't do anything else but use that stinking short sword. You know, like you can be a dual wielding elf with 2 short swords, and you look like a hibachi chef. But you had fun with that, and I loved playing that character until he got smashed in the ground at 3rd level by an ogre. But
I will say, I like a system that is more rewards based than punitive because, and I'll cite as an example, Pillars of Eternity, I believe the 2nd one, did a really cool job with this. It said, yes, anybody can use any weapon, we don't fucking care, but you do have, I forget what and then I've called it specialization. They called it something where you were trained specifically to use certain weapons, and you could only have so many of those, and obviously fighters had more. Everybody had at least one. And if you use the specific weapon you were trained in, then you unlocked that weapon's special ability. So in other words, instead of penalizing people and saying, oh, you have penalties for not using the weapons you're not trained in, instead they said you can use any weapons, so you don't have to feel bad about being stuck outside of a cool, like, magic item you found, but you get to unlock special abilities. Like some weapon might knock somebody down, or somebody might cause a bleed attack, or it was some kind of just special thing that you could do if you were trained to do it. And I thought that was a really cool system.
Hey, quick question. I have to go drive home, and I'll be home in like 35 minutes. How long will the roundtable be going?
We're probably going to start wrapping up pretty soon.
Oh, well, it was good. Thank you, guys.
Yay, thanks, Lucas. I'm glad you could join us.
Bye.
Hey, can I pop in with something? This is Genocider.
Genocider, yes, please, sir.
Hey, I just want to say 5th edition multi-classing is way better than AD&D. I don't know if it came about any edition between, but AD&D was terrible. You either started out at level 1 and you picked all the classes you wanted to be, and then all your experience got divided amongst those classes. And you could only do that if you were not a human. If you're a human,
right.
You got to a certain level and you picked your new class. You go to level 1 in that class. You can't use any of your old abilities
until you reach that level. Yeah. God.
Excellent point.
Yeah. Yeah, and now I can't. Yeah, and 3rd edition, they had unlocked it quite a bit, but they had I think XP penalties or something. But each race had its own favored class, I think. So some races were better at multi-classing into certain classes than others, and it just fed into that system of like you've got to min-max and optimize, whatever character, and you can use this build and this build, and that's a good point. I'm very glad that they unlocked a lot of that, even though I still stand by my point that multiclassing is way less necessary and way more rare than in 5th edition because of the subclass system. Because everybody at 3rd edition, you almost feel like you get a instant multiclass built in. You're like, oh, I can choose a whole other suite of things, and that almost feels like a multiclass. And in fact, in some, I don't have any example off the top of my head, but some of them actually even do, well, the Eldritch Knight for a fighter is like, oh, I can kind of, and Arcane Trickster for rogue, like I can kind of multiclass into spellcasting all of a sudden without actually doing that. Instead, it feeds into my base class.
Twilight Cleric.
Right, yeah. And I say this as somebody who both of my main characters in Chris's campaigns were multi-class disasters. Like I still multi-classed after all that because I just can't fucking help it. But yeah, I am glad that that's a lot easier in 5th edition. I mean, everything's easier in 5th edition. Like it's such a good, elegant game design, and because they've kept it so light and easy, it's very easy to be moldable if DMs want to then add stuff to it. All right, I think that's going to segue into our closing thoughts. So we're going to go in reverse order. Unfortunately, Lucas had to step out, so we're going to go with the Fireworks Factory. Closing thoughts on 5th edition versus older editions.
Okay. Well, first off, I'll say this administration supports 5th edition. That's the edition that everyone should be playing. With older editions, I feel that they're good to go back and just sort of leaf through the rule books for nostalgia reasons, but they belong in a museum, let's be honest. But I will say, like, some of the pre-written adventures, those are good to go back and look through and use as inspiration for 5th edition stuff. Specifically for me, that would be the B11 introductory module called the King's Festival. So if anyone is looking to transfer a 2nd edition module into 5th edition, I found that one was pretty easy to convert over.
Nice.
5th edition all the way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like adventures, a lot of them can stand the test of time. I will say that and Wizards has done that too. Obviously, Tales of the Yawning Portal was all, older classic adventures that they brought into 5th edition, and the DM's Guild, you can find a lot of older edition adventures that other people have converted into 5th. Now, I think for the most part, I think you have to have the original adventures, but all the conversion notes are there, which is pretty nice to have, like the new stat blocks and DCs and all the rules and stuff. Dory, closing thoughts on 5th edition versus older editions.
I mean, I love 5th edition, and I'm looking forward to see what they put out next. But I actually kind of want to dive in a little bit deeper, do some investigation. I really am interested to compare how much character backstory development was able to occur in older editions, because just hearing you guys talk about playing some of those older editions, it seemed like it was a lot easier to die, and that you were having to roll up new characters faster. So I'm kind of interested to do a little bit of a deep dive comparison on that, because it seems like it's incredibly hard to kill a character in 5e.
I agree, which is why it makes me upset when I still see some of those insta-kill abilities, because they are still there. There's some high-level spells. I think Beholders still have a way to just disintegrate people just with one of their high-damaging rays, which that feels very weird to me, and it feels like a legacy thing from older editions, because we have the death save thing, and it feels like players should have a chance and not feel like they are just killed because of a single dice roll. You want it to be in an epic moment that's after consequences that have happened and a couple different things, and maybe other players have a chance at reviving you, and the stuff like, oh, you stepped on the wrong thing and you fell into a pit of lava, or you were just, the beholder happened to target you and you got turned into a bit of dust. I guess that can be satisfying in some ways, but to me that always felt wrong for a game that's so strongly
seriously.
Yeah, into character development. So yeah, I do think that's a big change of 5th edition. whether or not that's a recipe for its success, I don't know. That's probably partially involved. I do think people care about their characters a lot more. They want to follow these characters, over weeks and months and years. I mean, shit. Stan mentioned listening to the Ack Inc. Podcast, which I forgot that was a big, and my wife's even a bigger fan of why I got into D&D. And they've literally been playing those characters for 10 years now, I think. I believe one of them did die at one point, but they, I think, went to hell and brought them back. But that was a whole arc. But yeah, people care about these characters a lot. Not just the players themselves, but fans of these characters care about them. So that's been a big change in 5th edition for sure. Christopher, closing thoughts on 5th edition versus older editions.
So I looked it up while we were sitting here. I got my 4th edition handbook off the shelf.
Oh, snap.
We did have death saving throws in 4th edition, but basically, if you roll less than a 10, you would get closer to death. 19 to 20, you didn't change. You didn't pop back up or anything. 20, you would become unconscious and you would become conscious and prone. So I think changing that definitely helped 5e. My thoughts on 5e is I think it's to the point now where we're just the frogs being boiled, right? We're not going to detect 5 to 5.5 to 6. I think all of these are going to feel very fluid and natural, where previous versions of D&D were kind of like stair steps, and epic jumps. I think from here forward are, smaller changes, that we're going to know about, but kind of not going to be able to differentiate from just new content coming through, like Tasha's. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we mentioned the fact that, it almost feels like we're in 5.5, even though it's been a gradual evolution even since 5th edition released.
Yeah, it's just a label, and actually, I think they don't want to they don't want to hurry up and do it just to lose the branding of that label, right?
Yeah. Officially called it 5.5, even though that's what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, we're going to get the 50th anniversary edition. Yeah, it'd be interesting.
This is probably another topic for another DM Roundtable, but it'd be very interesting if you have to imagine we're going to get 60 at some point, but maybe it'll just be this gradual evolution of they're just going to keep on having these patch notes, and they're never going to come out with World of Warcraft 2. It's just going to be 18 whatever years it's been for World of Warcraft. They just keep coming out. Instead, they'll do D&D Classic. That's just 5th edition, like circa 2014 or something. Pegleg Smitty, closing thoughts on 5e versus older editions.
5e is great. There's some elements from older editions that I feel are worth revisiting for either ideas, inspiration, or just little tweaks that you want to make. I don't feel like it's worth burying the past entirely, but yeah, I love 5th edition.
Bring back Thaco.
Oh, Thaco.
God. I do understand that reference, and I don't want to, I think the moment I went from not enjoying D&D mechanics to enjoying it is when armor class was a positive number versus or at least good armor class was a positive number versus a negative number, because I couldn't wrap my head around the negative number thing, the Thaco thing. All of that was just, it was too much for me, even though I did not too long ago play Icewind Dale and Baldur's Gate 2 and suffered through it. Stan, bring us on home for closing thoughts.
D&D has definitely been a pendulum of limited choices, very lethal. There are some good basic mechanics and some great adventures from 1st and 2nd edition. We can swing into feats for everybody and everything, and to now 5th edition, we've went from a war game to more of a cooperative storytelling game, potentially with too many choices. So pendulum, in my opinion, could swing back just a little bit, but I do like 5e is great for teaching new players. It's a lot of fun with friends and family, and it's a great way, depending on your comfortable seats, playing for 2 to 9 hours.
Yeah, I think if I had to make a choice, I would prefer the one that was the most accessible. and gave everybody the most options and just kind of left things open, because then any DM can say, well, I want to run my game as more of a war game, or I want to run my game as more of a RP session where we barely roll any dice, or anything in between of that. And I think 5e gives everybody the accessibility to do that. I think it has some not all great adventures, but generally pretty good high quality adventures that very few of them, I would argue, could be run as is, but a lot of them can be run 70% as is, which is pretty good in terms of adding your own content and filling the own holes and everything. 5th edition isn't perfect. There's probably things about one thing we didn't talk about. I think 4th edition's use of per encounter, at will, and per day abilities isn't necessarily a bad classification. And frankly, I know I'm going to get killed for this, but I would love if we got beyond the memorizing spells system that feels extremely old to me now. And again, as somebody who grew up with video games, I don't know, just give me a mana pool or give me cooldowns or something. I just don't want to have to worry about memorizing individual spells. But I realize that's such a legacy tool, and yet so was everything else. So was tying your races into being able to multi-class, or being able to even take certain classes, or whether you were a class at all. And now they've just evolved over the years, and it's been fascinating to look at with all these changes and steps they've made. And I think, as Christopher said, it's been this crazy big. Everyone has been a huge leap or step up, and then and many people thought 4th edition was not a step up, which is why Pathfinder was born, essentially, to be more 3.5. But 5th edition has really brought everybody back. I think it's been a huge success story. They've done a lot right. I think a lot of that can be attributed to the rise alongside D&D as an entertainment medium, as a streaming medium, and I think Wizards very smartly has jumped on that. They've partnered with Critical Role, and they've smartly started venturing into like the whole DM's Guild system, where they're not doing Dungeon or Dragon Magazine anymore, but instead people can from whatever you don't have to send in to write a thing. You can just it kind of democratized the publishing of all this adventure content and player content, and now you've got more of that than ever before. We have so much of this content, and yet Wizards has actually slowed down the release of official stuff, which means it's a fairly decently cheap buy-in compared to a lot of older editions. So there's just a lot of good to say about 5th edition. I'm obviously very satisfied with playing it, and I've enjoyed my time with it, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. All right, I think that will do it for this month's DM Roundtable. Thank you to Stan, Pegleg, Smitty, Christopher, Dory, Fireworks Factory, Lucas, Genocider, I believe, jumped in there a few times. And thank you to all of the patrons. Shout out to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Adam, Stan, William, I'm Loud, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplayer Roll, Christopher, and Dig Dug DM. And gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, and Scott. Thank you all very much for your support, and I hope to see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable discussion.
Bye.
Farewell.
Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.